Hi everybody, it's Heather here. This is a little bit of a different video from what I normally do. The lights are really dim. I'm clearly not wearing hair. My hair is kind of hanging out back there. One thing you may not know about me is that I suffer from cluster headache. I have been getting cluster headaches since I was about 30. So 2010 was when I first started to experience them. And I have gone to neurologists about this. I've had the full workup done, and I know that these are cluster headaches. I know that they are. So this is not one of those things where I'm like in need of a diagnosis or self-diagnosing something or just guessing based on what I Google searched. No, I do have this. And I'm making this video just in case any of you have similar symptoms but don't know what is causing it or don't know what it is, because there is a very large distinction. There's a big difference between a migraine headache and a cluster headache. Cluster headaches are incredibly painful. They are called suicide headaches, and they're called that for a reason. They are known to be one of the most painful things on the planet. Women who've had difficulty in childbirth who experience cluster headache often say that it's more painful than childbirth. It is, I wouldn't know, I don't have kids, but I mean, that's what the research says. I know that it is probably the most painful sensation I've ever had in my life, and I've had, gallbladder pain, and, I've had all kinds of pain in my life, but this is like a whole other level. I've got the lights sort of dimmed in this room because I had these headaches pretty much all night last night, and I've got a bit of a low-grade headache going on right now, but it is not a cluster headache. It's basically just some residual pain from what I had last night, and I'm trying to kind of keep everything kind of quiet, and sorry if I get a little unfocused here and there in this video. I mean, given the circumstances, but I'm just trying to keep things kind of low-key here, so that way I don't inadvertently trigger more clusters. So women are more likely to experience migraine, which is why I wanted to give that little disclosure about the difference between the two, because whenever I tell people I have cluster headache, they immediately tell me, oh yeah, I have migraines too. And I'm like, girl, no, they're different. They really, really are. And I'm not trying to minimize what you experience with your migraines, because I've had migraines too. And in fact, I often have migraines before I have a cluster headache. It's often how I know that they're coming on. So I do know that migraines are terrible. And I've had multiple forms of migraine. And the ones I experience preceding my cluster headaches tend to be like ocular migraines that sort of radiate outward, and then they really intensify, and that's how I know that it's turned into a cluster. But I mean, it does sort of trivialize what I'm experiencing and what people with cluster headache experience when we say that we're experiencing cluster headache, and people immediately respond with, I'm experiencing migraine, because there's a whole nother level of intensity out there to these headaches that if you're a migraine sufferer, you don't know about. And it's a good thing that you don't know about them. And conversely, if your migraines are really, really, really intense and they happen like my cluster headaches do, which I'll explain in a moment, you may want to go to your neurologist or seek out some professional help to see if perhaps you need a different diagnosis. Because if your migraines are infrequent, seasonally triggered, or, they kind of have random triggers, they happen seemingly once in a blue moon when the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter is aligned with Mars. If it's not something that you have noticeable, obvious triggers for that come and go in waves over a very short period of time, and they're extremely intense and they don't respond to any medication, period, you may have cluster headache and just not know it. And that's the problem with a lot of these disorders where, the doctors can't see it right away on a scan. They're relying on you to self-report, and sometimes if you don't know, how are you going to report it? For me, I just happen to have the good fortune, I guess, of having a cluster when I went to see my neurologist. My clusters maybe I should back up a little bit. I should actually give you a little bit of a definition of what these things are, right? For me, this is what I experience when I have a cluster headache. Everything's great for a really long time. Like, I don't get these very often at all. I have these episodes maybe 3-4 times a year tops. Knocking on wood. I almost knocked on my head and then I was like, what are you doing? But yeah, knock on things. I don't get them very frequently. But when I do get them, they don't have obvious triggers. It is not like a sinus headache or anything like that. It's even though some of these symptoms may sound like that when I start rattling them off, they're not triggered by allergies or anything like that. Usually I'm under a lot of stress when they happen, but I mean, I'm under a lot of stress all the time because, you know, I operate a business and I have a lot of employees and I'm trying to marry a guy from another country and, you know, all this stuff is very stressful. So to say that I'm under a lot of stress when I experience these headaches, when am I not under a lot of stress? So that may also just be a coinky-dink. But what I experience, and I'm going to kind of take my glasses off to sort of describe this a little bit, it's always the same. Always. I will immediately start to get a little bit of pressure right here behind my right eye. It never moves to the other eye. It never moves to this side of my head. It's always on this side of my head, the right side. And it basically goes like this. Like somebody just sectioned off the side of my head and decided that side's going to explode for a little while. But it starts right behind this eye, and I'll get a little bit of pressure, and I might get like a low-grade headache that will start to progress into ringing in my ear. My nose might start running. My eye might start drooping a little bit. And when that happens, it leaks, like it waters uncontrollably. That's when I know I'm in trouble. And then I get ocular migraine. So I start seeing auras on things. Sometimes I'll get double vision. Things, if that doesn't happen, things will get really, really, really blurry. And then, but only in this eye. And that stuff will get more intense as the pain intensifies. To the point where I have trouble opening my eye at all because every time I open it, it's just like a wave of pain. And that's still what I would consider kind of like the migraine that precedes this stuff, because it gets worse from there. This is how I know it when it goes from being a migraine to being a cluster for me, because I do get migraine once in a while. The cluster is when, and it is what it sounds like. They happen in clusters. They happen in waves. They're successive. And for some people, these will happen, you know, once a day for several weeks until they taper off. For some people, they happen, you know, multiple times a day. That's what happens with me. When these get triggered, my clusters are in really short succession. And so I'll get like that really intense pain I just described, and then it gets worse. It starts to feel like somebody is driving a red hot poker right through my eye and into the back of my head. And that pain just kind of radiates locally to the point where I can't hear out of this ear at all. And my nose is still stuffed up from yesterday. Like, there's so much inflammation here that you'll actually be able to see my eye droop. The mucus and grossness will not stop. And everything here feels like it's on fire. And it just gets so incredibly painful that you just want to bash your head up against a wall. I mean, the thought occurs multiple times. You know, just you want to crack your head open like an egg because it's just so painful. And just when you think that the pain is going to subside or can't possibly get worse, it does. It just keeps notching up until you feel like you want to jump out of your skin. And then it kind of recedes a little bit. But it never goes away during the middle of these clusters. So, I mean, to me, it recedes to the point where it becomes that low-grade headache with, you know, not being able to breathe right, the runny eye, the ringing in the ear, but a much lower grade of headache, maybe like a low-grade migraine sort of thing. And then it just ratchets back up. And this, you know, so that intensity phase lasts anywhere from like a half hour to 2 hours for me. It pulls back. I might get a little bit of a, you know, low-grade headache for a couple hours, and then that wave starts up again. And then that pattern just keeps going for hours and hours and hours, and sometimes days. And when it was really bad, it can go on for weeks. It is really, really awful. Now, I have not had cluster headache go on for week-long cycles for a really long time. When I was a little bit younger, I used to get them where they would last weeks like that, and it was just unbearable. And it was a real impediment to work, honestly, because there's no medication for this. Like, Topamax doesn't really work on cluster headache. That's one of the reasons why, you know, it is diagnostically relevant. If you've tried migraine medications before and you have them in this kind of cyclical pattern like I just described, then it could be cluster instead of migraine. And that's how I mean, luckily I saw a specialist. I was having a cluster when I went to see the specialist. The guy knew immediately what was going on. We did an MRI, you know, and, you know, the only thing that they had to tell me was, you know, you just got to ride them through, and oxygen therapy. Yes. Okay. So oxygen therapy. They will prescribe oxygen therapy for people who have cluster headache because it's really the only thing that helps minimize the pain and the intensity of the headaches. There are no painkillers, not even really hardcore ones would work on this stuff. I'm telling you. So I would have to have, when I first got diagnosed, I had a gigantic oxygen tank next to my bed, and I had a little oxygen tank that I was supposed to carry around with me everywhere I went. And, you know, I worked in IT, so I'm under people's desks, and I'm, you know, fixing computer equipment and setting stuff up, and it's just not a great environment to be carting around an oxygen tank everywhere you go. And so I finally made the choice that, you know, since these happen so infrequently, and the oxygen tank was just so damn cumbersome, that I was going to do without it. So I have not had oxygen therapy since 2013, and it's currently 2018, so it's been 5 years. And really, I feel like that was still the right choice. For the most part, I still sort of wish I had a big tank with me, so that way when I had these cluster headaches at home, I could do something to try to minimize them. And maybe that'll be something I pursue when I get back to the States. But, yeah, if you experience these things, or you think you may be experiencing these things, go talk to your doctor, because they're wretchedly painful. They're crippling, and they don't happen often. That's another diagnostic thing about this. There are two different kinds of cluster headache. There are chronic cluster headaches, which, God, that must be like hell on earth, because those are people who are always in a cluster, and they never have any downtime. I can't even imagine what that would be like. But for people who have, most people who have cluster headaches, these things only come on either seasonally, or they come on, you know, a couple times a year. And so that's a big difference between these and migraines. Those migraine sufferers probably get that a little bit more frequently. So I guess that's the trade-off for the intensity, right? Like, I don't really know which is worse. They both sound terrible to me. So that's what the point of this whole video is. Last night I had a cluster. It was terrible. I've still got a bit of a low-grade headache. The computer screen is kind of driving me bonkers, so I might end this video now. But, you know, if you've got these things, you're not alone, and there is help out there for this. So make sure you talk to somebody, and just know, I know what you're going through. If you experience migraine or cluster, I get them both, and they're both pretty terrible, and I wish I could breathe out of my nose right now. But, whatever. Have a great day, everybody, and hopefully your night is better than mine was last night, for sure. Bye, everybody.